I want you to picture a town. And I don't mean a suburb or, bustling little city. I mean a town so small that if you sneeze on Main Street, someone on the other side of the borough probably says, bless you.
Right.
We are talking about Coudersport, Pennsylvania. It's nestled way up in the northern part of the state, surrounded by forests, very rural, very quiet.
It's absolutely the kind of place that feels frozen in time. You have the brick buildings, the local diner, the sense that everybody knows everybody's business because, frankly, there isn't that much business to know.
Exactly. It is the last place on earth you would expect to be the epicenter of one of the largest, most catastrophic financial collapses in American history. But right there, in that tiny town, was the headquarters of Adelphia Communications Corporation.
It really is a story of incredible contrast. On one side, you have this quaint, almost Norman Rockwell-style setting, and on the other, you have a multi-billion-dollar empire that imploded in a way that, well, it shook Wall Street to its core.
We are talking about a company that started, and I love this detail, with a literal investment of $300.
$300.
That was it. And from that pocket change, it ballooned into a cable giant. But when it crashed, it was the 12th largest bankruptcy by assets in United States history.
It's a staggering statistic. I mean, when you look at the list of major bankruptcies, you see these massive faceless conglomerates based in skyscrapers in New York or Houston. And then you have Adelphia, run by a family in a town where they probably parked their own cars and walked into the office without a security detail.
That's what we are deep diving into today. This isn't just a story about numbers on a spreadsheet. It's a story about a family.
Yeah.
It's about hubris.
Oh, yeah.
It's about professional hockey teams buying thousands of acres of forest just to keep your backyard view pretty, and a fraud that was so simple, yet so massive, it's hard to believe they thought they'd get away with it.
And it's a case study in corporate governance, or rather, the total lack of it. It touches on the dangers of off-balance sheet debt, which sounds dry, but I promise you, in this story, it is anything but. It's about the psychology of entitlement.
And before we even get into the crime, we have to talk about the name, Adelphia. It sounds very corporate, maybe a little generic, but it actually means something specific, doesn't it?
It does. It comes from the Greek word for brothers.
Brothers.
Yeah. The company was founded by John Rigas and his brother Gus. And honestly, the irony of that name becomes absolutely crushing by the end of this story. This was a company built entirely on family bonds, on that tight-knit, blood is thicker than water trust.
Right. The idea that we're in this together.
Exactly. But ultimately, it was that inability to separate the family from the corporation that caused the entire structure to collapse. They treated a publicly traded company like it was still just the two brothers splitting a pizza.
That is the ultimate blurring of lines. My money, the company's money, what's the difference? Well, it turns out the difference was about $2.3 billion.
A very expensive and very illegal difference.
So here is our mission for this deep dive. We are going to unpack how this massive cable empire crumbled. We're going to look at the Christmas tree. Yes, actual Christmas trees played a role in the investigation.
It's true.
We're going to look at the hidden loans, and we're going to try to understand the mindset of a family that felt they were above the law, or perhaps that they just didn't think the law applied to family business.
And we need to answer a fundamental question. How does a man who starts with $300 and builds the American dream end up dying with a legacy of fraud and a prison sentence?
To understand that, we have to go back to the very beginning, 1952, the post-war boom. The American dream is in full swing.
It really was the quintessential origin story. You have John and Gus Rigas. They are in Coudersport. And you have to remember, in 1952, television itself is still this exploding medium. But in rural areas, getting a signal was a nightmare.
Oh, for sure.
You had mountains, you had distance.
Right. No satellite, no internet. If you didn't have a line of sight to the broadcast tower, you were staring at static.
Precisely. So the opportunity was in community antenna television, which is what cable was back then. You put a big antenna on top of a mountain where the signal is good, run a wire down the hill, and charge people a few bucks a month to hook into it.
And that's what they did. They bought a local cable franchise in Coudersport for exactly $300.
Which is an incredibly modest sum, even for 1952. Adjusted for inflation, we are talking about maybe, $3,000 today?
Something like that. It was a small bet.
A tiny bet. But John Rigas was diligent. He was a local guy, he knew the people, and he provided a service they desperately wanted. He was connecting them to the world.
But they didn't just sit on Cooter Sport. I mean, you can't build a multi-billion-dollar empire just by serving one small town. They had a strategy.
They did. Over the next few decades, they engaged in what we call a roll-up strategy. The cable industry is all about scale. It costs a lot of money to lay the wire. That's your capital expenditure.
Right. Huge upfront cost.
Huge. But once the wire is there, adding a new customer is cheap. So the more customers you have, the better your margins. The whole game is density.
So they just started buying up other little cable companies in neighboring towns.
Exactly. They aggressively acquired other systems. They expanded out of Cooter Sport into other parts of Pennsylvania, then New York, and eventually all across the country. They were consolidating a very fragmented market.
And to fuel that kind of growth, you need capital. You can't just do that on the profits from basic cable subscriptions.
No way. You need Wall Street money. So they went public. They listed the company on the NASDAQ under the ticker symbol ADLAC.
Now, this is a pivotal moment because once you go public, the rules change completely.
Completely.
You aren't just John and Gus running a business anymore. You have shareholders. You have the SEC. You have quarterly earnings calls.
You have a fiduciary duty to people who don't have the last name Rigas. And this is where the friction started, even if it wasn't visible yet. The Rigas family retained control both in terms of management and voting power, but they were now playing with other people's money.
But for a long time, nobody cared about the governance, right?
Yeah.
Because the stock was doing great, the company was growing.
That's the golden rule of Wall Street. As long as the line on the chart is going up, nobody asks too many questions. And for Adelphia, that line went up for a long, long time. If we fast forward to the peak around 1998 to 2001, they were a monster.
Give us the stats. How big do they get?
By 1998, they had over 2 million subscribers. They were one of the largest cable providers in the United States. And they weren't just doing TV anymore, they had diversified.
Right, because the late 90s was the dot-com boom. Cable wasn't just about sitcoms anymore. It was about the pipes for the internet. The high-speed connection was everything.
Exactly. In 1989, they established Adelphia Media Services for commercial opportunities and advertising. Then, in 1991, they launched Adelphia Business Solutions. This was their play for the B2B market, providing high-speed internet, phone services, voice messaging for businesses. They were positioning themselves as a full-service telecommunications giant.
It really felt like they had made it. If you were looking at them from the outside, this was a massive success story. A small-town family makes good, conquers the industry, and becomes a major player on the national stage.
And that success masked the rot. When you are growing that fast, acquiring companies left and right, your balance sheet gets incredibly complicated. And in that complexity, it is very, very easy to hide things.
And that brings us to the turning point, the year 2002. The bubble bursts.
The year everything changed, and it happened so fast.
So set the scene for us. It's March 27, 2002. Adelphia officials hold a conference call or they put out a press release.
Yeah.
And I imagine the analysts on the other end of the line nearly dropped their phones.
It was an absolute bombshell. They announced that there was a massive discrepancy in their financials. We aren't talking about a rounding error or some bad forecast.
No.
We're talking about $2.3 billion in unrecorded debt.
Okay, we need to pause and really unpack this. $2.3 billion.
Yeah.
How do you hide that? It's not like losing your keys in the couch cushions. This is the GDP of a small country. How does a public company keep $2.3 billion off the books?
This is where we have to get a little technical because the mechanism itself is fascinatingly simple in a way. It involves something called co-borrowing.
Co-borrowing. It sounds innocent enough, like co-signing a loan for your kid's first car.
In principle, it is similar, but on a massive corporate scale. Here's how it worked. Adelphia, the public company, had access to huge lines of credit from banks to fund their operations and acquisitions.
Okay, standard stuff.
But the Rigas family also had private companies, entities that were not part of Adelphia but were owned by the family, organized under a trust called Highland Holdings.
Okay, so you have the public company bucket and the private family bucket.
Yeah.
They should be separate, church and state.
Precisely. But Adelphia and the family entities entered into these co-borrowing agreements. This meant that the family's private entities could draw down cash from Adelphia's corporate credit lines.
So the family is taking cash out of the public company's credit card?
Yes. But here's the trick and the fraud. Adelphia was jointly and severally liable for all of it. That means if the family took out $1 billion through their private company and couldn't pay it back, Adelphia, the public company, and its shareholders was on the hook for the entire amount.
Okay, that sounds really risky, but if they disclosed it properly, is it illegal?
That's the catch. They didn't disclose the extent of it properly. On Adelphia's balance sheet, they wouldn't show the full amount of the debt as a liability for the company. They treated it as if it were the family's debt, even though the company was legally on the hook for it. They were netting it out, hiding the true leverage.
So investors are looking at Adelphia thinking, oh, they have X amount of debt, that seems manageable. But in reality, they have X plus $2.3 billion of debt that could drop on their heads at any moment.
Exactly. It completely distorted the financial health of the company. It made Adelphia look much more stable and much less risky than it actually was.
It's like finding out your spouse has a secret second mortgage on the house that they never told you about, but you are legally required to pay it if they stop making payments.
That is a very, very apt analogy. And the question then becomes, what was the family doing with all that money? Because $2.3 billion is a lot of spending money. It wasn't just going into building out the cable network.
Oh, this is where it gets really interesting. And frankly, this is the part that makes you angry. Because it wasn't just bad business investments. It wasn't like they were trying to invent a new type of cable box and failed. It was a personal piggy bank.
The investigation revealed that the Rigas family was using these public funds, drawn from these co-borrowing agreements, for illegitimately purchasing personal luxuries and assets. The lines were just gone.
Let's look at the shopping list. Because when the feds raided the place and went through the books, they found some items that just make you shake your head. First off, 17 company cars.
Which is excessive, certainly, but you could almost argue executive transport if you squint really hard. But then it gets much harder to justify.
Christmas trees.
Yes, Christmas trees.
The sources specifically mention Christmas trees. Now, I don't know about you, but a nice Christmas tree is maybe $100, $200. How many trees do you have to buy for it to show up as a line item in a federal fraud investigation?
It implies a massive amount, or perhaps they were flying in designer trees from, I don't know, Norway for every single property they owned. But it speaks to a lack of boundaries. When you are using shareholder money to buy holiday decorations for your personal homes, you have completely lost touch with the concept of fiduciary duty.
It's the pettiness of it, right?
Yeah.
If you're stealing billions, why bother stealing the Christmas tree money? It shows a mindset of, I own all of this. It's all mine.
And that mindset is perfectly illustrated by the timberland purchase.
Oh, the Cooter Sport land purchase. This is my favorite example of rich guy insanity in this whole story.
It is absolutely breathtaking. They bought 3,600 acres of timberland, and they paid $26 million for it. Using company money.
And just to be clear, Adelphia is a cable company. They run wires. They don't log forests. Why on earth did they buy this land?
According to the investigation, the primary motivation was to preserve the view in the backyard of John Rigas' home.
To preserve the view. They spent $26 million of other people's money so they wouldn't have to look at.
The what?
A neighbor,
Yeah.
a logging truck. It's just wild.
It suggests the Rigas family viewed the public company's cash as their own personal wallet. They wanted a nice view, the company had cash, so the company bought the view. This is the core psychological failure here. They didn't see a distinction between Adelphia, the corporation, and the Rigas family. In their minds, they built it, so they owned it. Every single penny of it.
It's the founder's trap. You started in your garage or with $300 in Cooter Sport, and you think it's yours forever, even after you take millions from investors. You forget that you sold a piece of the soul of the company in exchange for that capital.
And that entitlement didn't stop at land and cars. It extended into the world of professional sports.
Yep.
And this is where the visibility of the fraud became impossible to miss, because you can hide a loan document in a footnote, but you can't hide a hockey arena.
Right. Let's talk about the sports ventures, because nothing says, I have too much money and power, like buying a professional sports team.
It is the ultimate status symbol for the ultra-wealthy. In 1997, John Rigas bought the NHL's Buffalo Sabres.
The Sabres. Now, as a sports fan, owning a team sounds cool. But from a business perspective, sports teams are notoriously difficult investments, aren't they? They're often money pits.
They are often vanity projects. They lose money operationally, but gain value as an asset over time. The problem was, the Sabres were consistently losing money at the time Rigas bought them. They were bleeding cash.
So how do you plug the hole in a sinking ship? If the team is losing millions every year, who pays the players?
Well, in a normal world, the owner writes a check from his personal funds. But in the Rigas world, you use the other ship's fuel. The investigation found that misappropriated Adelphia funds were being used to subsidize the hockey team.
So they were just siphoning money.
Directly, siphoning money from the cable company to keep the hockey team afloat.
Wait, how did they even justify that on the books? Did they claim Adelphia was getting some massive advertising value from the Sabres?
That was the cover story. of course. But the amounts were completely disproportionate to any marketing value. They were just wiring cash to cover payroll and operations, essentially treating the cable subscribers in Florida and California as the financiers of a hockey team in Buffalo.
And the consequences of this were immediate once
Yeah.
the law got involved.
Oh, absolutely. The day John Rigas and his sons were arrested, the NHL had to step in immediately. They seized control of the franchise.
Imagine that. You are the owner one day sitting in the luxury box, and the next day the league says, nope, we'll take the keys, you're going to jail.
The team remained a ward of the league until 2003, when it was eventually sold to Tom Golisano. But it wasn't just the team itself. Adelphia tried to build a whole sports ecosystem. They wanted to be a media mogul, not just a cable provider.
They had the Empire Sports Network, right? A regional channel.
Yes, launched in 1990, a regional sports network serving Central and Western New York. And they also owned a radio station, WNSA.
See, that makes sense on paper. Vertical integration. You own the cable distribution, you own the TV network, you own the team that plays on the network. It's what Ted Turner did. It's what Comcast does now.
It is a sound strategy, provided you are paying for it with legitimate capital and the businesses are sustainable. But here, the synergy was fueled by the same pot of tainted money. It was a house of cards. They were propping up losing businesses with fraud.
And speaking of names on buildings, we have to talk about Nashville, Tennessee.
Ah, yes. The Adelphia Coliseum.
In 1999, they bought the naming rights to the brand new stadium for the Tennessee Titans. Now, here's what's funny to me. Adelphia wasn't even a big player in Nashville, were they?
Not really. They had a small subsidiary there, Adelphia Business Solutions, which was trying to compete with Bell South. But buying the stadium rights wasn't about local advertising. It was a massive marketing play. It was about projecting an image of national dominance.
It's the ego play. We are big, we are powerful, our name is on an NFL stadium on Monday Night Football.
Exactly. It signals to Wall Street that you are a Tier 1 company. But that image shattered very, very quickly. They bought the rights in 1999. By 2002, after the scandal broke and they missed a payment, the name was stripped off the building.
And for 4 years, the stadium didn't even have a sponsor. It was just called the Coliseum.
It stood as a kind of monument to the failure, a blank space where the Adelphia name used to be. It was a physical reminder of how quickly the empire had just evaporated.
So we have the cars, the trees, the land, the hockey team, the stadium. It's all built on this $2.3 billion lie. But gravity always wins. You can't levitate forever.
No, the crash is inevitable.
So let's walk through the collapse, because once that thread was pulled, the whole sweater unraveled incredibly fast.
The speed was breathtaking. We go from the revelation of the debt in late March 2002 to John Rigas resigning as CEO in May, just 2 months later. He was indicted for bank fraud, wire fraud, and securities fraud.
And then the bankruptcy filing.
June 26, 2002. As we mentioned at the start, this was the 12th largest bankruptcy by assets in U.S. history. To give you a sense of the scale, they needed a $1.5 billion loan just to restructure under bankruptcy protection, just to keep the lights on and the cable signals flowing while they figured out the mess.
The SEC didn't mince words about this, did they? They must have been furious.
No, they called it one of the most extensive financial frauds ever to take place at a public company. And you have to remember, this is in the era of Enron and WorldCom.
Right.
We are talking about the Hall of Shame of the early 2000s. The competition for worst fraud was stiff, and Adelphia was right up there on the podium.
So it goes to trial. And this is where the narrative battles play out. The federal prosecutors lay it all out. They show this complicated cash management system that spread money around to hide the debts.
Prosecutors painted a very clear picture of a family that treated the company as their personal fiefdom. They proved that, distinct from the debt hiding, the family had simply looted about $100 million specifically for themselves. That's the Christmas tree and Timberland money. That wasn't debt support. That was just theft.
What was the defense? I mean, how do you defend against that? I didn't know I couldn't buy a forest with company money.
Their defense was largely that they intended to pay it all back, that the lines between the family entities and the public company were blurry because the family was the company. They argued it wasn't malicious theft, but rather sloppy accounting and a chaotic corporate structure. They tried to portray John Rigas as a confused old man who was out of his depth with the complex financing, not a mastermind criminal.
But jury didn't buy it.
Not at all. The verdict came down in June 2005. John Rigas, the father, the patriarch, he was found guilty of looting and debt hiding. He was sentenced to 15 years in prison.
And his son, Timothy, he was the CFO.
Timothy Rigas, who was the CFO, the one who really should have known better regarding the financials, received 20 years.
Wow. That is serious time, especially for white-collar crime back then.
It is. In 2007, they reported to the Butner Federal Correctional Complex. It was a humiliating, devastating end. They were led away in handcuffs, the empire in ruins.
And here is where I think we need to pause and look at the nuance,
Mm-hmm.
because there is a detail here that makes Adelphia different from the other big scandals of that time. It's really fascinating.
Yes, this is the part that fascinates legal scholars and psychologists. The New York Times made a very, very keen observation. In a lot of these fraud cases, think pump and dump, the executives know the ship is sinking. They see the real numbers. They know it's over. So what do?
They sell. They cash out. They exercise their stock options, dump the shares on the market while telling everyone else to buy.
Exactly. They secure their own lifeboats while the passengers drown. But the Rigases didn't do that.
They didn't sell their stock.
No. They held their stock. They wrote it all the way down to zero. In fact, in some cases, they were buying more stock or putting up more collateral to try and save the share price as it was cratering.
So wait, if they weren't trying to cash out and run, what were they doing? Why commit fraud if you aren't going to take the money and run? It doesn't quite add up.
That is the tragic question. The evidence suggests they weren't trying to trick investors solely to get rich and flee. They were trying to hide inconvenient facts until they could fix them. They believed, perhaps delusionally, that if they just moved the money around long enough, the business would grow, the debts could be paid off, and no one would ever know.
So it wasn't pure malice. It was delusion, a belief that they could still land the plane.
The New York Times called it a more tragic crime than ordinary looting. It implies they really believed their own hype. They thought they could fix it. They viewed the company as their child. You don't abandon your child. You do whatever it takes to save it, even if whatever it takes is completely illegal.
That almost makes it scarier. A crook who knows he's a crook might stop when he has enough money. A delusional CEO who thinks he's saving the company will keep digging the hole until the entire earth collapses on top of him.
Precisely. It raises the question, is it more dangerous to have a greedy leader or a delusional one? The greedy leader acts rationally in their own self-interest. The delusional leader acts irrationally, believing they are the savior. The Rigases went down with the ship. They destroyed themselves along with the shareholders. They lost everything.
And speaking of going down with the ship, let's look at what happened to John Rigas personally.
Yeah.
Because this is where the story takes a turn that feels like it's straight out of a movie script.
It really does. So, John Rigas goes to prison in 2007. He is an old man by this point, in his 80s. Fast forward to 2015, he has served about 8 years of his 15-year sentence. His lawyers announced that he is terminally ill.
Bladder cancer, right.
Right. And the prognosis was grim. They said he had between 1 and 6 months to live. The cancer had spread to his lungs. He was frail. He was dying.
Based on this, he requested compassionate release. Which makes sense. If you have a month to live, the system often lets you go home to die in your own bed rather than a prison infirmary. It happens.
And the judge granted it. Judge Kimball Wood issued the order in February 2016. John Rigas was released to spend his final weeks with his family back in Cootersport.
It was a mercy release, a final act. But he didn't die in 6 months.
No. He defied the doctors completely.
How long did he live after being released?
He lived for 5 more years.
5 years.
He didn't pass away until September 2021 at the age of 96. So he essentially got a 5-year reprieve from his prison sentence due to a medical prognosis that turned out to be quite off the mark.
That is. Well, it's something. Talk about defying the odds in every sense. He survived the rise, the fall, the prison, and even the terminal diagnosis.
It adds another layer to the legend, doesn't it? The man who wouldn't give up control, wouldn't sell his stock, and wouldn't even die when he was supposed to.
But while John was living out his final years back in Cootersport, what happened to the company? What happened to the 15,000 employees who were stuck in the middle of all this?
That's the collateral damage we often forget. The employees didn't commit the fraud, but they lived through the chaos, the uncertainty. The cleanup was messy and took years. A restructuring plan was approved in 2004. The new CEO, William Schleier, had to come in and stabilize the ship. He made a point to emphasize the relentless effort of the employees who kept the cable running while the executives were on trial.
And in a bankruptcy like this, there is always a fight over the scraps. Who got paid, who got left with nothing.
The possession lenders, the bank lenders, the joint venture partners, the big institutional money, they got full cash payments. They were made whole.
And the Rigas family, did they salvage anything from the wreckage?
Zero. The bankruptcy plan explicitly stated, No payments to claims and equities of the Rigas family. They were wiped out completely. They forfeited their assets to help pay back the restitution.
And finally, the empire was sold off for parts. Adelphia ceased to exist.
In July 2006, Adelphia sold its assets for $17.6 billion to two giants, Comcast and Time Warner Cable.
So let's translate this for the listener. If you were living in an Adelphia service area in 2006, maybe in Los Angeles or Cleveland or Buffalo, you went to bed one night with an Adelphia cable box, and you woke up the next morning as a Comcast or Time Warner customer.
Exactly. Time Warner Cable actually distributed about $6 billion in shares to the Adelphia stakeholders as part of the deal, so there was some recovery for them. But the Adelphia name vanished from the bills, absorbed into these larger entities. Time Warner Cable later became Spectrum, of course.
So the name is gone, the stadium is renamed, the family is disgraced, the founder is dead. But are they gone? Is the story really over?
Not entirely, and this is the final surprise that most people don't know about this story.
The zombie company. I love this part of it.
You could call it that. The Rigas family, specifically the other brothers and family members who weren't in prison, established a successor company called Zito Media.
Zito Media.
They operate in some of the areas that weren't sold to Time Warner and Comcast, specifically in Potter County, Pennsylvania.
Back in Cooters.
Back in Cootersport. In fact, the visual here is absolutely striking. Adelphia had built this massive, opulent headquarters in Cootersport right before the crash. It was called the Taj Mahal of Potter County, a symbol of their power.
And who is in that building now? Let me guess.
Zito Media. The Rigas family is back in the same building, running a cable company in the same town.
So the family is still in the cable business. In the same town.
Yeah.
In the same building. It's like the ghost of the empire refused to leave.
It shows a level of resilience or perhaps stubbornness that is hard to comprehend. They return to their roots on a much, much smaller scale, but they are still there. It brings the story full circle, from Cootersport to the heights of Wall Street and all the way back to Cootersport.
That is wild. It really drives home the point that this was, at its core, a local story that just got way too big for its own good.
I think that's the perfect way to put it.
So what does this all mean? We've looked at the rise, the $2.3 billion fraud, the hockey teams, the prison sentences. When you step back, what is the big takeaway here?
I think a primary lesson is about corporate governance and the danger of the family business mentality when applied to a public corporation. You cannot treat a billion-dollar public entity like a personal fiefdom. The mechanisms of control, the board, the auditors, they all failed to stop a family that felt entitled to the cash. They failed to ask the hard questions because, well, the stock price was high.
It's the Christmas trees for me. It's the timberland. It's the idea that I built this so I can take this, even when this belongs to thousands of shareholders. It's a warning about what happens when founders refuse to transition from being builders into being stewards.
And believing your own hype. The Timberland purchase shows a complete detachment from reality. They thought they were untouchable. They thought the rules of gravity simply didn't apply to them.
And that leads to our final provocative thought for you, the listener.
We touched on it earlier, but I want you to really think about this. The Rigases didn't sell their stock. They went down with the ship, believing, however delusionally, that they could fix the hidden deck. So as an investor, or even just an employee, what is more dangerous? A CEO who is a calculated crook, robbing the place blind and planning an escape? Or a CEO who is so delusional, so convinced of their own genius, that they believe they can hide billions of dollars of debt and somehow make it all work out in the end?
One runs away with your money, the other one drives the bus off the cliff with you inside thinking you can make it fly.
Exactly. And the delusional one is often much, much harder to spot because their belief, it feels like passion, it feels like commitment, until it's way too late.
That is a terrifying thought to leave you with. Check your portfolio, everyone. Make sure your CEOs are sane, not just passionate.
Indeed.
Thank you for listening to this deep dive into Adelphia. It's a wild ride from $300 to $17 billion and back again.
It certainly is.
We will see you on the next deep dive. Stay curious.